The Philippines became one of Asia's fastest rising economies. Without following the path that built most of Asia, it did not rise like Japan. It did not rise like South Korea. It did not rise like China.
The Philippines hit upper middle income status with an expansionary fiscal strategy meant to boost growth, create jobs, and lift more Filipinos out of poverty.
The Philippines grew through something much stranger: migration, remittances, services, and a global labor system that changed the meaning of development itself. This is not just a story about a growing economy. It is a story about how history, extraction, migration, and global labor turned the Philippines into one of the most unusual economies in Asia. In some ways, the Philippines became a country powered by absence. At first glance, the story looks simple. The Philippines is growing. Its cities are expanding. Its service sector is rising. Its population is young. And millions of Filipinos are working harder than ever, both at home and abroad. But underneath that growth is a much stranger story. This is not a classic industrial success story. This is not simply a country that built factories, exported goods, and climbed the manufacturing ladder. The Philippines is an economy built not only on what it produces inside its borders, but also on what its people earn across the world. Its strength is not only inside the country. A major part of it is scattered across hospitals, ships, homes, hotels, offices, and construction sites around the globe. And that makes the Philippines different. Because the modern Philippine economy is tied to one of the biggest forces of the modern age: global labor migration. Across Asia, the most famous economic miracles followed a familiar pattern. Japan industrialized. South Korea built giant manufacturing champions. China became the workshop of the world. Vietnam rose through export factories. Taiwan and Singapore climbed through industry, technology, and trade. But the Philippines followed another path. A large part of its economic strength came from households, services, migration, and remittances. In other words, the Philippine economy became powered by people, not only by machines, factories, or exports. That sounds like a strength, and in many ways it is. But it also raises a deeper question. Why did the Philippines end up with an economy shaped as much by migration as by manufacturing? Why did one of Asia's most talented, educated, and globally connected populations become so dependent on opportunity outside its own borders? To answer that, we have to go back centuries, because this story did not begin with call centers. It did not begin with overseas workers. It did not begin with remittances. It began with an economy designed for someone else. Long before the modern Philippine economy, the islands were already connected to trade networks across Asia and the Pacific. But colonial rule changed the direction of that development. Under Spain, land, power, and wealth became concentrated in the hands of a small elite. The economy was organized around colonial control, religious authority, forced labor, tribute, agricultural estates, and trade that served imperial interests. The economy was never designed to create broad prosperity. It was designed to extract. And that mattered because land is never just land. Land is power. Land decides who can build wealth, who can farm, who can borrow, who can invest, who has security, and who stays dependent. Colonial rule did not just occupy the Philippines. It organized the economy around dependence. Then came American rule. The United States brought new institutions, new schools, infrastructure, public health systems, and new links to global markets. English language education helped create one of the most internationally adaptable workforces in Asia. But even that modernization came with limits. The Philippines was tied closely to the American economy. Its exports, institutions, and political structures were shaped through a relationship that looked modern on the surface, but still carried deep dependency underneath. So the result was not just inequality. It was a structure that made broad industrial development harder from the start. By the time the Philippines moved toward independence, it did not inherit a blank slate. It inherited a system where land was unequal, capital was concentrated, power was personal, and the economy had been shaped more for control than transformation. Long before independence, the Philippines inherited an economic model built for extraction, dependence, and elite power. And that system would shape everything that came next. Independence should have opened the door to a new economic era. This was the moment when the Philippines could have built a stronger industrial base, spread opportunity more evenly, and turned its population into a long-term engine of national power. The country had major advantages. It had an educated population. It had English language skills. It had access to American markets. It had natural resources. It had cities, ports, and institutions that many post-colonial countries did not yet have. But the transformation did not happen smoothly. The Philippines struggled with political instability, elite dominance, weak long-term planning, and policy inconsistency. Too often, short-term interests defeated long-term development. Too often, the same families and the same structures kept control of land, capital, and opportunity. And this is one of the most important reasons the Philippines looks the way it does today. It was not simply poor. It was not simply unlucky. It was not simply underdeveloped. It was repeatedly held back from transforming itself. The country had growth, but not enough transformation. It had talent, but not enough industry to absorb it. It had ambition, but not enough structural reform to turn that ambition into broad national prosperity. And when a country keeps missing its chance to build a strong industrial foundation, the effects last for decades. Because factories do more than produce goods. They create skills. They build supply chains. They deepen technology. They raise productivity. They create national bargaining power. Without that foundation, an economy can still grow, but it grows with a gap at the center. And in the Philippines, that gap would eventually be filled by something else: labor migration. When the country could not fully industrialize at home, it exported labor instead. Then came deeper shocks: debt problems, corruption, cronyism, economic instability, political violence, and the long shadow of authoritarian rule under Ferdinand Marcos. These were not just political events. They were economic turning points. They weakened institutions. They discouraged investment. They distorted markets. They made long-term planning harder, and they made it even more difficult to build a stable manufacturing base. While other Asian economies were charging ahead in industry, the Philippines was struggling to stay on course. Growth came, but unevenly. Progress came, but with fragility. Modernization came, but without enough transformation underneath it. And for ordinary Filipinos, the result was simple and painful. If the economy at home could not provide enough opportunity, people had to look elsewhere. A weaker home economy pushed millions to build stability somewhere else. This is where the modern Philippine story truly changes. The country learned to grow by sending labor abroad. Millions of Filipinos began working abroad. They became nurses, caregivers, seafarers, engineers, domestic workers, construction workers, technicians, hotel staff, teachers, service professionals. They went to the Middle East, North America, Europe, East Asia, Australia, and across the world's shipping lanes. And the money they sent home became one of the most powerful forces in the Philippine economy. These remittances are not just statistics. They are school fees, groceries, medicine, rent, new roofs, small businesses, college tuition, family survival. They are the reason a child stays in school, the reason the parent pays a hospital bill, the reason a family builds a house one room at a time. For many households, remittances are the difference between struggle and stability. But this strength came with a cost, because every remittance begins with separation. A mother leaves her children to care for someone else's. A father spends years at sea while his family grows up through phone calls. A nurse heals patients in another country while her own community loses skilled workers. A worker builds another nation's economy while trying to support a household back home. This is what makes the Philippines so unusual. Its economy depends on people who are not always physically there. The nation's strength was not only inside its borders, it was in the labor of Filipinos spread across the world. And that is where GDP and GNI begin to tell different stories. GDP measures what is produced inside the country. GNI includes income earned by Filipinos wherever they are in the world. For the Philippines, that difference matters enormously, because so much national income is tied to the global Filipino workforce. This is not a minor feature of the economy. It is one of its defining pillars. The Philippines became part of a worldwide system where human work moved across borders to keep local economies alive. Entire communities survived because Filipino workers carried the economy from abroad. And that is the paradox. Its greatest economic asset was also one of its greatest losses: its people. But remittances are only part of the story. Back home, another engine was rising services. The Philippines became a major center for business process outsourcing, call centers, digital support, back office work, finance services, and online labor. The same historical forces that pushed Filipinos outward also made the country globally competitive in services: English language education, a young labor force, cultural adaptability, urban growth, and deep familiarity with global markets. The country became one of the most important service economies in Asia. At the same time, domestic consumption became a powerful driver of growth. When families spend remittance income, salaries, and business earnings, that money moves through the whole economy. It supports stores, transport, housing, education, food, entertainment, real estate, and small businesses. So the Philippine economy became something very specific, a system powered by people earning, sending, spending, and surviving. Its economy was shaped as much by migration as by manufacturing, and for a long time, that system worked. But it also carried a weakness. The strength of this model is obvious. It is flexible, it is resilient, it is global, and it is deeply human. It keeps money flowing into households. It protects families during hard times. It connects the Philippines to the world, and it gives the country a source of growth even when domestic industry is not strong enough. But the weakness is just as real. If global labor markets slow down, the Philippines feels it. If foreign economies enter recession, Filipino workers abroad feel it. If demand for nurses, caregivers, seafarers, or service workers changes, families back home feel it. If domestic reforms stall, the country remains dependent on people leaving to find opportunity elsewhere. A remittance-heavy model can be powerful, but it is exposed. A service-heavy economy can grow fast, but it still needs deeper industrial strength if it wants lasting independence. That is the real challenge. The Philippines has learned how to grow. Now it must learn how to transform. Because a country cannot rely forever on sacrifice as an economic strategy. That is what makes the Philippines so fascinating in Asia. It is not the region's richest economy. It is not the most industrialized. It does not have the same manufacturing scale as China, South Korea, Vietnam, or Taiwan. But it is rising. It is resilient. It is young. It is globally connected. And it is increasingly impossible to ignore. Its population is one of its greatest strengths. Its labor force is global. Its service sector is expanding. Its cities are growing. Its digital economy is developing, and its people continue to adapt in ways that keep the country moving forward. So the question is no longer whether the Philippines matters. It already does. The question is whether it can turn this unusual growth model into something deeper, stronger, and more self-sustaining. Can it build more industry? Can it create more high-quality jobs at home? Can it keep more families together? Can it turn global Filipino strength into domestic economic power? That is the next chapter. Because in the end, the story of the Philippines is not just about GDP, remittances, rankings, or growth rates. It is about history. It is about extraction. It is about post-colonial capitalism and the global movement of labor. It is about a nation shaped by outside powers, held back by inequality, tested by policy mistakes, and carried forward by millions of people at home and abroad. The Philippines did not rise like the classic Asian industrial economies. It rose through migration, services, adaptation, and sacrifice. Its greatest economic asset was also its greatest loss: its people. And that leaves one final question. Can the Philippines keep rising by depending on its people across the world? Or will its next chapter be the one where it finally turns that global strength into lasting economic independence?